Hey there, and welcome to Crazy Pepper, the channel where drama sizzles and revenge burns hotter than ever. If you love jaw dropping twists, bold characters, and stories that keep you guessing till the end, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into gripping tales of betrayal, karma, and ultimate payback. Get ready for unforgettable moments and satisfying endings, only on Crazy Pepper. Hit that bell and let the drama begin. You know what they say about the best laid plans? Mine just got torched in front of 200 of the city's most influential people. And I'm standing here with a martini in one hand and divorce papers in the other, wondering how $20 million buys you a front row seat to your own public execution. Let me back up. My name is Lucas Dalton, and until about 15 minutes ago, I thought I was attending my wife's triumphant moment. Veronica had finally done it. Opened her own law firm after years of dreaming, planning, and spending my money like it was Monopoly cash. Tonight was supposed to be her grand opening party, the culmination of everything we'd worked toward together. The venue was perfect, naturally. The Meridian Club, overlooking Boston Harbor with its crystal chandeliers and marble floors that probably cost more per square foot than most people's cars. I'd paid for it all, of course. The catering, the open bar, the string quartet playing softly in the corner. Hell, I'd even paid for the custom invitations printed on Italian paper that announced the birth of Cross & Associates Legal Partners. Cross. That would be Elliot Cross, Veronica's business partner, and, as I was about to discover, much more than that. I should have seen the signs. The way conversation stopped when I approached groups of lawyers. The barely suppressed smirks. The whispered comments that cut off mid-sentence when I got too close. But I was too proud, too invested in the fantasy that my wife actually loved me for something other than my bank account. Lucas! Veronica's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade. She was stunning tonight. Midnight blue dress that hugged every curve, diamond earrings catching the light, red lips curved in what I'd mistaken for genuine happiness. Could you come here for a moment? She was standing near the center of the room, surrounded by her new colleagues and what looked like half of Boston's legal establishment. Judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, all the power players who could make or break a new firm. I walked over, straightening my tie, ready to play the supportive husband role one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, Veronica announced, her voice carrying across the room with practiced authority, I'd like you all to meet my husband, Lucas. Though I suppose that's about to change. The laughter started as a ripple and built to a wave. I felt my stomach drop as I noticed people pulling out their phones, some already recording. This wasn't the introduction I'd expected. You see, Veronica continued, her smile never wavering, Lucas here has been what I like to call my test run husband. Practice for the real thing, you might say. And now that I'm established, well, she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, holding it like a trophy. The crowd pressed closer, sensing blood in the water. The first official job of Cross & Associates Legal Partners is handling my divorce. Lucas, darling, I need you to sign these papers and leave. Consider it our firm's inaugural case. The envelope felt heavier than it should have when she pressed it into my hands. Around us, the crowd erupted in applause and laughter. Someone shouted, "Now that's what I call efficient." Another voice called out, "Talk about cutting overhead." I looked at the faces surrounding me. These people I'd written checks to support their campaigns, whose charity events I'd sponsored, whose children went to private schools my donations helped fund. They were looking at me like I was the evening's entertainment. Elliot Cross pushed through the crowd, his arms sliding possessively around Veronica's waist. Nothing personal, Lucas, he said with a smirk that suggested it was entirely personal. Just business. The room spun slightly, not from alcohol. I'd barely touched my drink. From the sudden, crushing realization that I'd been the mark in a long con, and the payoff was happening right now, in front of everyone who mattered in this city. Well, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, I suppose congratulations are in order? I tucked the envelope under my arm and set my martini on a nearby table. The olive rolled to the edge of the glass and stopped, balanced precariously between safety and falling. That's it? Veronica looked almost disappointed. No scene, no begging? Would it make better content for your social media? I asked, gesturing toward the phone still recording our exchange. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but not enough to stop the show. I walked toward the exit, the crowd parting like I had something contagious. Behind me, I heard Veronica's voice rise again, probably launching into her prepared speech about the firm's mission and values. The irony wasn't lost on me. The elevator ride to the parking garage gave me exactly 90 seconds to process what had just happened. 90 seconds to mourn a marriage that had apparently been a business arrangement from day one. 90 seconds to feel sorry for myself. Then the doors opened, and I stepped into a different world. A world where Lucas Dalton wasn't the sufferer of an elaborate humiliation. A world where $20 million in startup funding could disappear as quickly as it had appeared. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. Tom, it's Lucas. I need you to freeze every account connected to Cross & Associates immediately. Yes, I know what time it is. Because my wife just served me divorce papers at her opening party, and I want her to understand the concept of immediate consequences. The second call went to my bank. Private wealth management has its perks, including 24-hour access to people who can move mountains of money with a few keystrokes. Margaret, Lucas Dalton, I need to execute the withdrawal protocols we discussed for the Cross & Associates investment, all of it. No, this isn't a drill. Third call, the venue management company. This is Lucas Dalton. I'm calling to cancel payment authorization for tonight's event at the Meridian Club. Yes, immediately. The credit cards should decline in about 3 minutes. I was on my 5th call when the elevator dinged behind me. Heather Walsh, one of Veronica's new associates, stumbled out looking panicked. Mr. Dalton, thank God you're still here. There's some kind of problem with the catering bill, and Mrs. Dalton's cards aren't working, and the venue is threatening to shut down the bar, and Heather, I said gently, ending my call, take a deep breath, then go back upstairs and tell my wife that the first job of her firm just became a lot more complicated. The poor girl looked confused, but she nodded and hurried back to the elevator. I finished my remaining calls in peace. Office lease payments, utility deposits, staff salaries, the works. Every financial thread I'd woven to support Veronica's dream, I cut with surgical precision. My phone started buzzing before I'd even reached my car. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. I ignored them all and drove home through the quiet Boston streets, classical music playing softly on the radio. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. Not physically, everything was exactly where we'd left it this morning. Veronica's coffee cup still sat in the sink, her law journals scattered across the kitchen island, her reading glasses folded neatly on top of the latest issue of Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly. But the emotional landscape had shifted completely. I poured myself a scotch, the good stuff, the 18-year-old Macallan that Veronica always said was too expensive for casual drinking, and settled into my home office. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting in the same chair where I'd signed the checks that funded her betrayal. My phone had stopped buzzing temporarily, showing 43 missed calls and counting. I scrolled through the contact names. Veronica, 12 calls. Elliot Cross, 8 calls. Numbers I didn't recognize, probably panicked vendors, and even a few from people at the party who'd apparently realized they'd witnessed something more significant than entertainment. The doorbell rang at 11:47 p.m. I checked the security camera feed on my phone and wasn't surprised to see Veronica standing on my doorstep, still in her midnight blue dress, but looking considerably less composed than she had an hour ago. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was clutching her phone like a lifeline. I let her ring 3 more times before opening the door. Lucas? Her voice was breathless, desperate. We need to talk. Do we? I thought we covered everything pretty thoroughly at your party. She pushed past me into the foyer, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. You can't do this. You can't just destroy everything we've built. Everything we've built? I closed the door and leaned against it, studying her face. I'm sorry, I thought I was just the test-run husband. What exactly did I build, according to your speech tonight? Don't be ridiculous. You know what I meant. Actually, I don't think I do. Why don't you explain it to me? She spun around, her dress swirling dramatically. In better circumstances, it might have been beautiful. The party was a disaster, Lucas. Complete chaos. The caterers packed up in the middle of service. The venue cut off the bar. People were leaving before I could even finish my presentation. That does sound unfortunate. Unfortunate? Her voice cracked. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Vendors demanding payment, staff asking about their salaries. clients questioning whether we're even solvent. You've destroyed my reputation in one night. I walked to the living room and settled into my favorite chair, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing, pacing like a caged animal. Let me make sure I understand the timeline here, I said conversationally. This morning, we were married. Tonight, you publicly humiliated me and served me divorce papers in front of 200 people. And now you're upset that I've withdrawn my financial support? You're being vindictive. I'm being logical. You wanted a divorce. I'm giving you one, along with complete financial independence. That's not... She stopped pacing and stared at me. You planned this. You knew what was going to happen tonight. I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. Veronica, if I'd planned this, do you really think I would have shown up to be humiliated in front of half of Boston's legal community? Give me some credit. Then why are you so calm? Because, I said, taking a sip of my scotch. For the first time in 3 years, I'm seeing you clearly, and honestly, I'm impressed. The whole test-run husband thing was brilliant, really. You married me, spent my money building your career, waited until you were established enough to survive on your own, then discarded me in the most public way possible. It's actually quite elegant. She sat down hard on the couch across from me, her composure finally cracking. It wasn't supposed to be like this. How was it supposed to be? You were supposed to fight it, contest the divorce, draw it out for months while we established the firm. The publicity alone would have been worth millions in free advertising. Ah, I nodded slowly. So I was supposed to be the bitter ex-husband, making you look like the strong, independent woman overcoming adversity. That's actually not bad. Very modern. Very marketable. Lucas, please. Tears were starting to form in her eyes. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. You can't just walk away from everything we've built together. What we've built. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Veronica, let me tell you what we've built. I've built a successful business that generates enough income to fund other people's dreams. You've built a law degree and a professional network. Together, we've built absolutely nothing except a very expensive illusion. That's not true. I turned back to face her. Name one thing we've built together that doesn't involve my money. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I'll save you the trouble, I continued. There isn't anything. This house, my money, your law school tuition, my money. Your networking events, your professional wardrobe, your bar exam prep course, the seed money for your firm, all my money. The only thing you contributed was the performance of being my wife. I loved you, she whispered. No, I said gently. You loved what I could do for you. There's a difference. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. Elliot Cross's name appeared on the screen. I answered it on speaker. Lucas, thank God. Listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Elliot. Your business partner just explained the whole plan to me. Very thorough, very professional. Look, we can work this out. The firm needs that investment. We have obligations, commitments. You have obligations to your creditors, I corrected. I have no obligations to you at all. In fact, as of tonight, I'm not even sure I have obligations to your business partner anymore. You can't just destroy people's lives because your feelings got hurt. I looked at Veronica, who was watching me with a mixture of fear and calculation. Elliot, let me ask you something. When you were planning tonight's little show, did you consider what would happen if I didn't react the way you expected? Silence on the other end of the line. Because here's the thing about humiliating someone in public. It only works if they're powerless to respond. And you made one critical error in your planning. What's that? You assumed I was powerless. I ended the call and looked back at Veronica. You should probably call him back. I imagine you have a lot to discuss. She stood up slowly, smoothing down her dress. This isn't over, Lucas. Actually, it is. You made sure of that tonight. She walked to the door, then turned back. You know, I really did love you once. Maybe you did, I said, but not enough. After she left, I sat in the quiet house and finished my scotch. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork and the messy business of untangling 3 years of shared finances. But tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt free. My phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from my sister Maggie, who lived in Chicago. Saw the video online? Holy crap, you okay? I typed back, better than okay. Call you tomorrow. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next morning brought coffee, sunshine, and a small army of reporters camped outside my house. Apparently, someone at the party had posted the video online, and it had gone viral overnight. Test Run Husband was trending on social media, along with various hot takes about marriage, money, and public humiliation. I watched the coverage from my kitchen window while drinking my first cup of coffee. The local news had picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about modern relationships. One particularly dramatic anchor was calling it the most expensive divorce announcement in Boston history. My doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. Through the security camera, I could see my lawyer, Tom Morrison, standing on the doorstep with his briefcase and his trademark expression of barely contained amusement. Tom had been my attorney for 8 years, handling everything from business contracts to real estate deals. He was also one of the few people who'd never seemed particularly impressed by Veronica. "Morning, sunshine," he said when I opened the door. "Hell of a party last night. You saw the video?" Everyone's seen the video. My teenage daughter sent it to me at 6 a.m. with 3 fire emojis, and the comment, "Your client is savage." He followed me into the kitchen, nodding toward the reporters outside. "How long have they been there?" "Since dawn, apparently. Coffee? Please." He settled onto a bar stool and opened his briefcase. "So, let's talk about where we stand legally. First, the good news: the prenup you insisted on 3 years ago is ironclad. Veronica's entitled to essentially nothing from your personal assets." I poured 2 cups and slid one across the counter. "And the bad news? The bad news is that she's not going quietly. Her lawyer called me at 7:30 this morning, threatening to contest everything. They're claiming emotional distress, reputational damage, loss of business opportunities, basically throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." "Who's representing her?" "Interestingly enough, she's hired Patricia Kellerman." I whistled low. Kellerman was Boston's most notorious divorce attorney, known for taking scorched earth approaches to high-asset cases. She was also expensive as hell, which raised an interesting question about how Veronica planned to pay her fees. That's bold, considering her firm apparently has about $12 in the bank right now. Tom grinned. "Actually, it's even better than that. I did some checking this morning. Cross & Associates had exactly 1 client signed up before last night, a small personal injury case worth maybe $50,000 in fees. Everything else was prospective business that evaporated when the party turned into a disaster." "What about Elliot's personal finances?" "Leverage to the hilt. He quit his job at Henderson & Associates 6 months ago to start the firm with Veronica. Burned through his savings on office space and equipment. He's actually in worse shape than she is." I sipped my coffee and considered this. So they're essentially broke. Broke and desperate, which makes them dangerous. Tom pulled out a folder and spread several documents across the counter. "I've prepared counter filings for everything they might throw at us. Fraud claims, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We can make arguments that she's the one who should be paying you." "I don't want her money, Tom. I know, but sometimes the best defense is a good offense. If she knows we can hurt her worse than she can hurt us, she'll be more likely to settle quickly and quietly." My phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister's name. "Maggie," I answered. "You're up early for Chicago time." "I'm at Logan Airport," she said. "Thought you might need some backup." I felt a smile spread across my face. Maggie was 2 years younger than me and twice as fierce. She'd built a successful private investigation business in Chicago, specializing in corporate fraud cases. If anyone could help me navigate this mess, it was her. "You didn't have to fly out here?" "Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss this for anything. Besides, I have some ideas about your wife's business partner." Tom raised an eyebrow. I put the phone on speaker. "What kind of ideas?" "The kind that involve public records searches and financial background checks. Give me 12 hours, and I'll know more about Elliot Cross than his mother does. Maggie, meet Tom Morrison, my attorney." "Tom, this is my sister Maggie, who apparently has a suspicious mind." "Pleasure," Tom said. "And I like the way she thinks." "I'll be there in an hour," Maggie said. "Don't sign anything or talk to any reporters until I get there." After she hung up, Tom gathered his papers and stood to leave. "I like your sister. This is about to get interesting." "It's already interesting. Last night was just the opening act. Speaking of which..." He paused at the door. "I should probably mention that Kellerman's office called about scheduling a settlement conference. They want to meet next week." "Already? That was fast." Desperate people move quickly. The question is, what do you want to accomplish here? Because we could drag this out for months, make them spend money they don't have on legal fees, really twist the knife. I thought about Veronica's face last night when she realized her perfect plan was falling apart. The fear in her eyes when she showed up at my door. The way she'd tried to manipulate me even then, playing the sufferer after orchestrating my public humiliation. I want them to understand consequences, I said finally. Real lasting consequences. Tom smiled. Now you're speaking my language. After he left, I spent an hour returning phone calls from business associates and friends who'd heard about the divorce. Most were supportive, some were curious, and a few seemed to be fishing for gossip they could spread at their next dinner party. The most interesting call came from Rico Vasquez, an old friend who owned an auto repair shop in South Boston. Rico and I had grown up in the same neighborhood before my business took off and moved me to the more upscale part of the city. He was one of the few people who'd known me before the money, and he'd never been impressed by Veronica. Saw the news, he said without preamble. That was some cold crap she pulled. Yeah, well, live and learn. You need anything? Place to stay? Someone to watch your back, whatever? I'm good, Rico, but thanks. I'm serious, man. Rich people fights get nasty. You might need someone who knows how to handle things the old-fashioned way. I almost laughed. Rico was probably the only person in Boston who would offer to solve my problems with his fists. I'll keep that in mind. And, Lucas, for what it's worth, I never liked her. Too shiny, you know? Like she was polished up for sale. After we hung up, I realized Rico had summed up my marriage better than any of the lawyers or therapists or well-meaning friends who had offered their opinions over the years. Veronica had always been polished up for sale. I'd just been too stupid to realize I was the buyer, not the partner. Maggie arrived an hour later, breezing past the reporters with the confidence of someone who had dealt with media attention before. She was dressed in her usual uniform of jeans, boots, and a leather jacket that had seen better days, carrying a laptop bag that probably contained enough surveillance equipment to stock a small spy shop. "Nice circus," she said, gesturing toward the reporters as I let her in. Very dignified. "Welcome to my new reality." She hugged me tightly, then stepped back and studied my face. "You look good. Better than I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I thought you'd be a mess. Drinking too much, feeling sorry for yourself, maybe planning to take her back when she inevitably came crawling. She did come crawling, last night, and I told her no." Maggie grinned. "There's my big brother. Now let's talk about how we're going to destroy these people." Maggie set up her mobile command center in my dining room, spreading laptops, documents, and surveillance equipment across the mahogany table that Veronica had insisted we buy from an antique dealer in Beacon Hill. The irony of using her precious table to plot her downfall wasn't lost on either of us. "Okay," Maggie said, cracking her knuckles like a pianist preparing for a concert. "Let's start with the basics. Tell me everything you know about Elliot Cross." I settled into the chair across from her with a fresh cup of coffee. "Harvard Law, class of 2018. Worked at Henderson & Associates for 5 years, made junior partner last year. Left 6 months ago to start the firm with Veronica. How did they meet? Law school. And they dated briefly, broke up when he graduated a year ahead of her. Reconnected at some alumni event 2 years ago." Maggie's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Henderson & Associates, high-end corporate law. Very prestigious. Junior partners there typically make between $300,000 and $500,000 a year. So why leave to start a small firm with your wife?" According to Veronica, he wanted to build something of his own. More personal satisfaction, closer client relationships, that kind of thing. "Bees," Maggie said without looking up from her screen. "Nobody leaves a $500,000 salary for personal satisfaction. There's always another reason." She pulled up several windows on her laptop, cross-referencing public records, social media profiles, and professional databases. This was Maggie in her element. She could find dirt on a saint, given enough time and internet access. "Interesting," she murmured after a few minutes. Elliot Cross was named in a sexual maltreatment complaint at Henderson & Associates 8 months ago. What kind of complaint? A paralegal named Jennifer Martinez accused him of inappropriate conduct. Unwanted advances, quid pro quo suggestions, hostile work environment. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. That would explain why he left. It gets better. According to the Massachusetts Bar Association's disciplinary records, Cross received a formal reprimand for conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice 6 months ago, right around the time he quit Henderson. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. So he didn't leave for personal satisfaction. He left because he was about to be fired. Bingo. And here's the kicker. Guess who represented him in the maltreatment case? Please tell me it wasn't Patricia Kellerman, the same lawyer who's now representing your wife. The pieces were starting to fit together. Elliot's sudden departure from a prestigious firm, his partnership with Veronica, the elaborate plan to humiliate me publicly. It was all starting to make sense. They've been planning this for months, I said. Longer than that. Maggie pulled up another screen. Look at this. Cross & Associates was incorporated 9 months ago, 3 months before Elliot officially left Henderson. They've been laying the groundwork for this since before he was even unemployed. What about the office space? Leased 7 months ago, expensive downtown location, 2-year commitment. Monthly rent is $48,000. I did the math quickly. That's over $500,000 a year just for rent. Plus equipment, staff salaries, insurance, marketing. I'm estimating they need at least $2 million in annual revenue just to break even. And according to Tom, they have exactly one client. Who's probably going to fire them after last night's disaster? Maggie looked up from her laptop. Lucas, these people were never planning to build a successful law firm. They were planning to build a lifestyle business funded by your money. A lifestyle business? Think about it. Prestigious downtown office, high-end clients, society events, professional recognition. All the trappings of success without actually having to earn it. Your $20 million was supposed to subsidize their fantasy for at least 5 years. And the divorce was supposed to happen after they were established enough to survive without you. But something went wrong with their timeline. I thought about Veronica's behavior over the past few months. The late nights at the office, the mysterious phone calls, the gradual emotional distance. She's been pulling away since the summer, because that's when they realized they couldn't wait any longer. Elliot's reputation was getting worse, not better. They needed to make their move before he became completely unemployable. My phone rang, interrupting our analysis. Tom Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Tom, you're on speaker. My sister's here. Good timing. I just got off the phone with Patricia Kellerman. They want to meet tomorrow morning to discuss settlement terms. That's even faster than we expected. It gets better. Kellerman specifically mentioned that her clients are prepared to be reasonable about asset division if we can reach an agreement quickly. Maggie and I exchanged glances. Define reasonable, I said. She's proposing that Veronica waive all claims to your personal assets in exchange for a one-time payment of $5 million and restoration of the business investment. So they want $25 million total? That's the opening bid. But here's the interesting part. Kellerman emphasized that time is of the essence. They need an answer by Friday. Why Friday? That's what I plan to find out. But my guess is they have some kind of deadline they're not telling us about. After Tom hung up, Maggie resumed her research with renewed intensity. Friday deadline, she muttered. What happens on Friday? She pulled up calendar applications, court schedules, and business filings, looking for any events that might explain the urgency. Got it, she said after 20 minutes. Elliot Cross has a disciplinary hearing with the Massachusetts Bar Association on Monday. If he's suspended or disbarred, Cross & Associates becomes a one-lawyer firm with a very expensive overhead. And Veronica can't carry that alone, especially not with her reputation in tatters after last night. They need your money to keep the doors open long enough for this scandal to blow over. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the reporters who were still camped outside. The story had legs, apparently. Every few minutes, another news van pulled up to the curb. What do you think we should do? I think, Maggie said, closing her laptop with a satisfied smile, we should let them sweat until Friday, then make them an offer they'll never forget. What kind of offer? The kind that teaches them the difference between being clever and being smart. That evening, I had dinner with Rico at his favorite restaurant in South Boston, a family-owned Italian place that had been serving the neighborhood for 40 years. The food was incredible, the atmosphere was warm, and nobody cared about trending hashtags or viral videos. So what's the plan? Rico asked over plates of homemade pasta. I'm not sure yet. My sister has some ideas. Your sister's the PI, right? I like her already. She's good at what she does. Rico leaned back in his chair, studying my face. You know what I think? I think you're enjoying this. What makes you say that? Because for the first time since I've known you, you look like yourself again. Not the guy trying to make his wife happy, not the guy walking on eggshells around her fancy friends, just Lucas. He was right, I realized. Despite everything, the public humiliation, the media attention, the impending legal battle, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Maybe I am enjoying it a little. Good, because from where I'm sitting, this is the best thing that could have happened to you. Even if it cost me $25 million. Rico shrugged. Money comes and goes. Self-respect is harder to get back. We finished dinner in comfortable silence. Two old friends who understood that some conversations didn't need many words. When Rico dropped me off at home, the reporters had mostly dispersed, leaving only a few diehards hoping for a late-night development. Inside, Maggie was still working, surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups. Find anything else interesting? Oh, you have no idea, she said without looking up. Your wife and her boyfriend have been very busy little bees. Very busy and very sloppy. How sloppy? She handed me a stack of documents. Sloppy enough to hand us everything we need to destroy them. I looked at the papers in my hands. Financial records, email printouts, legal filings. What am I looking at? Evidence, Maggie said with a grin. Lots and lots of evidence. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth and crystalline clarity. I dressed carefully for the settlement conference. Navy suit, white shirt, conservative tie. The uniform of serious money and serious consequences. Tom had scheduled the meeting for 10 a.m. at his office, neutral territory that would give us every advantage. Maggie had spent the past 3 days assembling what she called the nuclear option, a comprehensive dossier of financial irregularities, ethical violations, and outright fraud that would end both Veronica's and Elliot's legal careers permanently. She'd also uncovered something even more damaging, evidence that they'd been planning the divorce scam for over a year, complete with email exchanges discussing how to maximize the settlement and minimize my ability to fight back. Remember, as she said as we reviewed the materials one final time, let them make their presentation first. Let them commit to their story before we show our cards. And if they refuse our counteroffer, then we release everything to the Massachusetts Bar Association, the IRS, and every major news outlet in New England. They'll be lucky to find work as paralegals when we're done with them. Tom's office occupied the top floor of a Back Bay brownstone, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the public garden. It was the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted about money and power. Perfect for what we had planned. Veronica arrived first, looking polished but strained. She was wearing her armor, a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, paired with jewelry that caught the light just so. But I could see the cracks in the facade, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted around the room, the forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elliot came in 5 minutes later with Patricia Kellerman, and I had to suppress a laugh. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Rumpled suit, bloodshot eyes, the desperate energy of a man watching his world collapse in real time. Kellerman, by contrast, was perfectly composed, radiating the cold confidence of someone who'd made a career out of other people's misery. "Gentlemen," Kellerman said as they settled around Tom's conference table, "thank you for agreeing to meet on short notice. I think we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably." "I'm sure we can," Tom replied smoothly. "Please proceed with your proposal." Kellerman opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "My clients are prepared to be very reasonable, Mrs. Dalton will waive all claims to marital assets in exchange for a one-time payment of $5 million and restoration of the business investment to Cross & Associates. $25 million total," I said. "A bargain, really, considering the circumstances. My client has suffered significant reputational damage as a result of your actions on Tuesday night. The firm has lost potential clients, existing business relationships have been damaged, and the partners are facing personal financial hardship." I looked across the table at Veronica. She was staring at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. Elliot, meanwhile, was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Interesting," Tom said. "And what exactly are the circumstances you're referring to?" "Mr. Dalton's vindictive withdrawal of financial support in the middle of a public event," Kellerman replied. "The deliberate sabotage of a legitimate business venture. The intentional infliction of emotional distress." "Ah," Tom nodded thoughtfully. "And so your position is that Mr. Dalton was obligated to continue funding a business owned by people who had just publicly humiliated him? The manner of the divorce announcement was admittedly poorly handled." "Poorly handled?" I couldn't help myself. She called me her test-run husband in front of 200 people and handed me divorce papers like I was a process server. My client was under significant stress, Kellerman said coolly. The pressure of launching a new business, combined with the emotional difficulty of ending a marriage, led to poor judgment in the execution. The execution, Maggie said quietly from her seat beside me, or the entire plan. Kellerman's eyes sharpened. I'm sorry, who are you? Margaret Dalton, Maggie said, extending her hand. Private investigator and Lucas's sister. I've been looking into the circumstances surrounding Tuesday night's events. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Veronica finally looked up, her face pale. Elliot shifted uncomfortably in his chair. As I was saying, Kellerman continued, but with noticeably less confidence, my clients are prepared to be reasonable. That's generous, Tom said. But before we respond, I think Ms. Dalton has some information that might be relevant to the discussion. Maggie opened her laptop and connected it to Tom's presentation system. The wall-mounted monitor came to life, displaying the first slide of her presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, standing up, let me tell you a story about a marriage that was never a marriage, a business plan that was never a business plan, and a divorce that was never really about divorce. The first slide showed a timeline stretching back 18 months. January 2023, Maggie began. Elliot Cross receives his first formal complaint for sexual maltreatment at Henderson & Associates. March 2023, Veronica Dalton begins having lunch meetings with Cross, meetings she never mentioned to her husband. Veronica's face had gone completely white. Elliot was staring at the screen like it was showing his own execution. May 2023, Cross & Associates is incorporated. June 2023, Elliot Cross receives a formal reprimand from the Massachusetts Bar Association. July 2023, the law firm's office space is leased. August 2023, Elliot Cross quietly resigns from Henderson & Associates. This is all public record, Kellerman said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're right, Maggie agreed, but this isn't. The next slide showed email exchanges between Veronica and Elliot discussing their plan in explicit detail. The subject line of one email read, Timeline for L extraction. L extraction, Maggie read aloud. That would be Lucas extraction, I assume. Here's a particularly interesting exchange from September 2023. She clicked to the next slide, showing a conversation between Veronica and Elliot. V, we need at least 18 months of operating capital before we make the move. Can you keep him happy that long? V, I can keep him distracted. The man thinks I actually love him. E, what about the prenup? F, that's why we go public. Humiliate him enough, and he'll pay anything to make it go away. The silence in the room was deafening. Veronica was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Elliot looked like he was about to be sick. There's more, Maggie continued cheerfully. Financial records showing that Elliot's been paying for Veronica's personal expenses for months, hotel receipts from their romantic getaways. Even some interesting photos from their trip to Martha's Vineyard last summer. How did you get these emails? Kellerman demanded. Veronica forwarded them to her personal Gmail account, Maggie explained, probably so she could access them from her phone. Unfortunately, she forgot that Lucas pays for the family cloud storage plan, which automatically backs up all devices on the account. I looked at Veronica, who was staring at me with a mixture of terror and desperate pleading. You read my emails? I didn't, I said quietly. But after Tuesday night, I asked my sister to find out how long you'd been planning to betray me. Turns out the answer is, since before we celebrated our second anniversary. Kellerman was frantically taking notes, probably calculating how quickly she could distance herself from this disaster. My clients may have exercised poor judgment in their personal communications, Mons, but that doesn't invalidate their legal claims. Actually, it does, Tom said, sliding a document across the table. Fraud in the inducement, conspiracy to commit theft, breach of fiduciary duty. We have enough evidence here to file criminal charges, not just civil ones. You're bluffing. Try us, Maggie said sweetly. The room fell silent again. I could hear the clock ticking on Tom's wall, the distant sound of traffic from the street below, the barely audible hum of the air conditioning system. Finally, Elliot spoke. What do you want? I leaned forward, looking directly at Veronica. I want you to understand consequences, real, lasting consequences. What kind of consequences? Here's my counteroffer, I said. You sign an uncontested divorce decree today. No alimony, no asset division, no settlement payment. You get to keep your personal belongings and whatever money you had before we got married. That's it? That's it. In exchange, I don't file criminal charges for fraud and theft. I don't release the emails to the media. And I don't report your ethical violations to the Bar Association. Veronica looked at Elliot, then at Kellerman, then back at me. And if we refuse, then by Monday morning, every news outlet in New England will have copies of your emails. The Bar Association will have a formal complaint detailing your conspiracy to defraud me. And the IRS will receive documentation showing how you've been hiding income and misrepresenting business expenses. You can't do this. Actually, Tom said, he can. And frankly, given the evidence, it's a generous offer. Kellerman whispered something to Veronica, who shook her head violently. They had a brief, heated exchange in low voices before Kellerman stood up. We need time to consider this offer. You have until Monday at 9 a.m., I said. After that, the offer expires and we proceed with criminal charges. This is extortion. No, I said, standing up as well. This is justice. There's a difference. As they filed out of the conference room, Veronica turned back one last time. I really did love you once, Lucas. No, I said quietly. You loved the idea of me. You loved what I could do for you, but you never loved me. After they left, Tom poured 3 glasses of bourbon from the bottle he kept in his desk drawer. Well, he said, raising his glass, that was more fun than I've had in years. Think they'll take the deal? Maggie asked. They don't have a choice, I said. Elliot's disciplinary hearing is Monday morning. If he's suspended or disbarred, their firm is finished anyway. And if we release those emails, their careers are over, Tom finished. Not just their firm, their entire professional lives. We drank our bourbon in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon sunlight stream through the windows. Outside, Boston continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the small drama that had just played out in a Back Bay law office. So what happens now, Maggie asked. Now, I said, we wait for them to realize they've lost. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Boston weather that matched my mood perfectly. I dressed in my best suit, the charcoal Armani that Veronica had always said made me look like a Fortune 500 CEO, and headed to Tom's office for what I hoped would be the final act of this particular drama. The weekend had been surprisingly peaceful. No frantic phone calls from Veronica, no desperate text messages from Elliot, no emergency motions filed by Patricia Kellerman, just silence, which in my experience was usually the sound of people accepting the inevitable. Tom was waiting in his office with coffee and a satisfied expression. They sign, he said without preamble, sliding a folder across his desk. Uncontested divorce, no alimony, no asset division. Delivered by courier at 8:30 this morning. I opened the folder and scanned the documents. Everything was exactly as we'd demanded. A clean break with no financial obligations on either side. After 3 years of marriage and 18 months of elaborate deception, it was over. What about Elliot's disciplinary hearing? Postponed indefinitely. Apparently he's entered into a consent agreement with the Bar Association. Voluntary suspension of his license for 2 years, completion of ethics training, and a substantial fine. So he's out of the legal profession. For now. He might be able to come back eventually, but his reputation is finished. No major firm will touch him. I set the papers down and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my business, met my wife, and learned some expensive lessons about trust and betrayal. It felt different now. Not smaller exactly, but more manageable. Like a problem I could solve rather than a maze I was trapped in. There's something else, Tom said. Patricia Kellerman called this morning. Cross & Associates is dissolving. They're closing the office, laying off the staff, and liquidating their assets. What about their clients? All 2 of them? They're being referred to other firms. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But then I remembered standing in that ballroom, listening to 200 people laugh at the test-run husband, and the sympathy evaporated. Any word on what they're planning to do now? Elliot's apparently moving back to his parents' house in Connecticut. Veronica paused, consulting his notes. Veronica has accepted a position with a small firm in Springfield, significantly reduced salary, no partnership track, basically starting over. Springfield? About 90 miles west of here, far enough away that she won't be running into her former colleagues at legal events. I nodded slowly. Springfield wasn't exactly legal exile, but it wasn't the prestigious Boston career she dreamed of either. It was the kind of place where ambitious young lawyers went to rebuild their reputations or quietly fade into obscurity. So it's really over. It's really over. You're a free man, Lucas. Congratulations. We shook hands and I gathered up the divorce papers. 3 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of legal documents that would fit in a manila envelope. There was probably a metaphor in there somewhere, but I was too relieved to care. Outside Tom's office, I called Maggie to give her the news. She was back in Chicago, having flown home Saturday morning with the satisfied air of someone who'd completed a successful mission. So they folded completely? Like a house of cards in a hurricane. Elliot's suspended, Veronica's in exile, and their firm is history. Good. They had it coming. Thanks for everything, Maggie. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have. You just would have been nicer about it. After we hung up, I stood on the sidewalk outside Tom's building, watching the city wake up around me. Commuters hurried past, focused on their own dramas and deadlines. Office workers grabbed coffee from street vendors. Tourists consulted maps and guidebooks, trying to navigate an unfamiliar city. None of them knew that Lucas Dalton had just won a war that started with public humiliation and ended with total victory. None of them cared that a marriage built on lies had finally collapsed under the weight of its own deception. They had their own problems, their own battles, their own small triumphs and defeats. It was liberating, actually. For the first time in years, I was just another guy in a suit walking down a Boston street. Not the test-run husband, not the mark in an elaborate con, not the fool who'd funded his own betrayal. Just Lucas. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be Veronica. Maybe one last attempt at manipulation or reconciliation. But the message was from Rico. Saw the news, drinks tonight to celebrate? I typed back, absolutely, the good stuff. As I walked back to my car, I passed a newsstand where the local business journal was displaying a headline. Cross & Associates closes after brief, turbulent run. The article was probably full of speculation about financial difficulties and market pressures, the usual corporate euphemisms for spectacular failure. It wouldn't mention the real story. The marriage that was a business plan, the divorce that was a publicity stunt, the revenge that was both swift and thorough. That was fine with me. Some stories were better left untold. I spent the afternoon at my office, catching up on business that I had neglected during the divorce proceedings. My company had thrived without my constant attention, which was both reassuring and slightly humbling. The world, it seemed, could function perfectly well without my drama. Around 5 o'clock, my assistant knocked on my door. "Mr. Dalton, there's someone here to see you, says she's a reporter." I looked up from my computer, frowning. I'm not giving interviews. I told her that, but she says it's about your wife's law firm. Something about a follow-up story? Curious to spite myself, I agreed to see her. She was young, probably fresh out of journalism school, with the eager energy of someone chasing her first big scoop. "Mr. Dalton, thank you for seeing me. I'm Sarah Chen from the Boston Business Chronicle. I'm working on a story about the collapse of Cross & Associates, and I was hoping you could comment on your role in their financial difficulties." "I don't have a role in their financial difficulties," I said carefully. "I withdrew my investment after my wife served me with divorce papers. That's not unusual behavior for someone who's just been publicly humiliated. But sources close to the firm say you deliberately sabotaged their opening party and forced them into bankruptcy." "Sources close to the firm?" I almost laughed. Miss Chen Cross & Associates had exactly 3 employees, my wife, her business partner, and 1 associate. If your sources are close to the firm, they're probably the people who drove it into the ground. She scribbled notes frantically. "So you're denying that you acted vindictively?" "I'm saying that I acted rationally. When someone publicly humiliates you and demands a divorce, continuing to fund their lifestyle isn't rational behavior. What about the timing? Some people are saying you planned this as revenge. Some people are wrong. I had no idea what was going to happen at that party. If I had, I probably wouldn't have shown up." She asked a few more questions, but I could tell her heart wasn't in it. The story she'd been hoping for, vindictive ex-husband destroys innocent business, wasn't materializing. The reality was much more mundane. Woman betrays husband, husband stops giving her money, consequences ensue. After she left, I locked up my office and headed home. The reporters had finally given up their vigil outside my house, moving on to fresher scandals and more current controversies. The circular driveway that had been clogged with news vans was empty except for my own car. Inside, the house felt different. Not empty. It had never been particularly full of warmth, but clean somehow. Like a space that had been cleared of clutter and was ready for whatever came next. I poured myself a scotch and sat in my favorite chair, the one Veronica had always complained was too big for the room. She was probably right, but I'd kept it anyway, one small act of rebellion in a marriage full of compromises. My phone rang. Rico's name appeared on the screen. You ready for that celebration? More than ready. Where do you want to meet? How about that fancy place downtown, the one with the rooftop bar? I almost said no automatically. That was the kind of place Veronica and I used to go, the kind of place where I might run into her former colleagues or current enemies. But then I realized I didn't care. Let them see me celebrating. Let them wonder what I was planning next. Perfect, I said. See you in an hour. The rooftop bar was crowded with the usual mix of lawyers, bankers, and other professional types who measured their success in billable hours and stock options. I spotted several faces I recognized from Veronica's networking events, people who'd probably heard every detail of our very public divorce. Rico was waiting at a corner table, looking slightly out of place in his best shirt and jacket. He'd made an effort to dress up for the occasion, which touched me more than I'd expected. So, he said, raising his beer as I sat down, how does it feel to be a free man? Expensive, I said, lifting my own glass, but worth every penny. You know what the best part is? What? You didn't just win, you made them destroy themselves. He was right. I hadn't ruined Veronica's career. She'd done that herself with her emails, her lies, her elaborate deception. I hadn't destroyed Elliot's reputation. His own behavior had accomplished that long before I entered the picture. I'd simply provided the stage for their self-destruction and made sure the audience was paying attention. We drank and talked until late. Two old friends celebrating not just the end of a bad marriage, but the beginning of whatever came next. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, I found myself genuinely happy for the first time in months. You know what you should do now? Rico asked as we prepared to leave. What's that? Find someone who deserves you. Someone who sees you for who you are, not what you can buy them. Maybe I will, I said, but not yet. I think I need some time to remember who I am first. Fair enough. But when you're ready, don't settle for another Veronica. You're worth more than that. As we walked to the elevator, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored walls. I looked different than I had a week ago. More relaxed, more confident, more like the person I'd been before I'd gotten caught up in Veronica's orbit. The elevator doors opened and we stepped inside. As we descended towards street level, I felt like I was leaving more than just a rooftop bar. I was leaving behind the last remnants of a life that had never really been mine, stepping into a future that was completely my own. Outside, the city stretched out before us, full of possibilities and second chances. Rico headed toward his car, and I walked in the opposite direction, taking the long way back to my own vehicle. The night air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of autumn and new beginnings. My phone buzzed one last time, a text message from an unknown number. I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me, V. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations were over, some apologies came too late, and some bridges were better left burned. I got in my car and drove home through the quiet Boston streets, past the law offices where ambitious young lawyers were probably working late into the night, past the restaurants where other couples were celebrating anniversaries and planning futures together, past the courthouse where my divorce decree would soon be filed and forgotten. At home, I poured one final scotch and stood at my living room window looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, I would start the process of rebuilding my life. I would travel, maybe, explore new business opportunities, reconnect with old friends and make new ones, date eventually, when I was ready to trust someone again. But tonight, I was content to simply stand in my own house, drinking my own scotch, celebrating the end of the most expensive lesson I'd ever learned. The lesson that love without respect is just expensive theater, that trust without honesty is just elaborate fraud, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a sufferer. I raised my glass to the city lights, to the future, to the man I was becoming. Here's to new beginnings, I said aloud, my voice echoing in the empty room. And for the first time in 3 years, I meant it.